Hi, this is Dr. Bosworth, and this week we're going to look at radio. Um, but first, we probably need to take a step back and look at recorded music, which was the precursor to broadcast radio. It's important because recorded music was the first mass medium that was not based on print technology, printing words on paper. So that's important. And what was the function of recorded sound? And that was basically entertainment and cultural transmission, um, passing along those vocal histories that we developed as a culture in the United States. It was also a learning tool. Children would learn speech and words, vocabulary from the repetitive use or the repetitive hearing of music and sound. They would learn rhythm and tone from this repetitive music. Um, and then back in the 1980s, with the launch of MTV, that added a whole visual aspect to music and recorded sound along that area. This all developed starting in the 1870s with the develop of sound devices, including the phonograph, the graphophone, and the gramophone. These would use various different technologies, including wax cylinders and wax discs that would basically capture sound by putting grooves in a wax cylinder of some sort. So that's the early development of that. In the 1950s, vinyl LP records were developed that did the same thing, and they were a little bit more stable than the wax cylinders that had been used. The 1960s was the development of electromagnetic tape, which were included in the cassette tapes that some people still have, and then the ill-fated 8-track tape technology. And then in the 1980s, you had CD technology, compact disc technology, which did the same thing, but it was digitized music. Looked like a little miniature LP record, but the records were digitally encoded rather than with grooves and such. Where did this industry develop? Early or late 1800s, early 1900s, developed out of Tin Pan Alley in New York City, where a lot of recorded music was written. You have George and Ira Gershwin recording here, Irving Berlin, as well as Cole Porter, coming out of Tin Pan Alley, where the music was written by sort of journeyman music writers. That lasted for a long time. You go through the jazz era of the 1920s, and then the 1950s, the big growth of rock and roll, coming out of its roots in jazz, R&B, and gospel music, and then the changing of that through the 1950s and in the 1960s with the British invasion, with the Who, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles, obviously. The 1970s, you get glam rock and disco and punk rock developing. The 1980s, you get heavy metal and pop rock, popular rock and roll. And the 1990s, you get alternative rock. So rock and roll is not one thing. it develops and has subcultures developing into it, which is important because all of those support the overall movement of that rock and roll um, umbrella genre. Um, you look at the industry with the recording labels in 1998. There were about six. In about 2004, that developed down to 4 or 5, I think. Today, I think it's a right around that with Sony, BMG, the Bartelsman Music Group, BMI. So it's a very condensed industry. As a lot of the media industries have condensed and basically are controlled by a lot of umbrella corporations that have control over many of the recording labels. Um, the music business model really centers around the creation of music. So a music label will sign an artist to a development contract, and they will develop music and help that artist put out I won't say records anymore, but put out albums, and basically they promote that artist and its music. Then they go through a distribution channel and set pricing for that. So if you're not a popular artist, these record companies really go out and try to find talent, try to develop it from the ground up. You just don't get to be a a top act right off the bat. It is really over time that you get to be that way. Um, so the labels will basically work with the development of the music, the pricing of it, the distribution, and the promotion of the artist and their music. What are some of the problems with that model today? It's not built around, well, it's not built around CDs anymore, or records, or anything like that. It's really built around digital downloads. Um, and a few years ago, the piracy issues of illegal downloads of music and coming up with a digital rights management technology that keeps people from copying music and sharing it illegally. Um, and those new models of music now you can buy just a single song with digital downloads. You don't have to buy the entire album, a quote unquote album anymore. And then there's even the subscription service where you don't own the music. You buy the rights to access it for however long the subscription goes. So the music model has changed entirely in the last 30-40 years. So that's one thing that's being changed there. Recorded music then led into radio. Um, so what did people that had these fancy phonographs and gramophones and stuff in their houses want? Well, they wanted to take the music with them. And so this idea of radio, but the funny thing about radio was it didn't develop as a way to broadcast music. It basically developed a way for doing away with landlines for voice communication. I mean, up to this point, you had the telephone lines, and what they were looking for basically was wireless telephone. They were looking for cell phones. And that really is how cell phones work, except we did it through a little bit more advanced with satellite nature now. But basically, they were looking for wireless telegraphy. Um, and going back a little bit for wireless, the telegraph with the little dots and dashes and stuff like that, because that was seen to be vulnerable during the Civil War, because each side would cut the other one's telegraph wires. Um, it didn't really work well with music to start with, um, because you couldn't really get a lot out of that. So advances came along, and so that really developed to where today radio is the most widely used medium in the world, is the most available mass medium in the world, and it's the most widely used in the United States, simply because we drive a lot and every car has a radio in it. It's less expensive than television to produce and transmit the signal, simply because it doesn't use that much electromagnetic spectrum to transmit the signal. Um, and it's even pretty much less expensive than print media, simply because you're not adding in a physical thing that you've got to ship. And there are basically three types of radio. The two terrestrially based formats, AM and FM. AM basically is amplitude modulation, and the effects of that allow the signal to go farther, but it's not as clear. FM, or frequency modulation, the signal can't go as far because physical structures, things get in its way. Mountains get in the way. A tree line will get in line. Tall buildings will get in the way. But if you can get a good line of sight for the signal, it is a much clearer signal. And then obviously today you've got satellite radio, which is a totally different technology all to itself, but it's probably the one that's growing fastest. What are the functions of radio today? Obviously, entertainment and information. Lots of times in the rural areas, it'll be the dominant format of broadcast, simply because in the rural you're not going to have a television station. And the radio station will be broadcasting important agricultural information to help the local farmers. And probably one of the most important functions of radio is its emergency broadcast capabilities. Because radio is mobile, it basically is it can be miniaturized with it. You can wear it on your wrist practically. You can get information to people in emergency situations. So that's probably one of the most important functions if you look at the global nature of the technology. Radio today basically is, you're looking at the ideas of, well, and you look at the networks with radio. Television today, you look at NBC, CBS, ABC. They started as radio networks. NBC was the first network in radio. CBS developed second, and ABC developed out of the second network that NBC had. NBC had NBC Blue and NBC Red. The government came in and said, you really can't control that much of the broadcast spectrum. So NBC spun off one of its networks, and that became ABC, American Broadcasting Company. You look at the outlook today with satellite transmission, with personal podcasts, the ability to set your own stations, with digital broadcasting, and then a lot of radio stations have developed new revenue streams from the ability to basically stream their music online. That way you expand your audience, and you get money that way. So that's really what we're looking at in this section of the course, is the growth of, now we're not in print anymore, we're really into the broadcast of sound, and that will eventually will be to lead to capturing video, also capturing images and being able to broadcast those. So make sure you read through the materials. Think about this. Think how important radio is. Everybody seems to be downplaying the importance of it, but because radio isn't just for broadcasting music. There are important functions of the radio medium other than simply being the precursor to iPods and stuff. So think about those important functions, and how radio plays a part in your life. So we'll get through this week, and I think we'll have some fun. I'll have some things up on the discussion board, obviously, and then I'm going to post a couple of things to the announcements that deal with sort of maybe a historical look at radio and its effects on society. So let's have a good week.